In the merciless winter of 1868, Wyoming Territory, an unthinkable betrayal is about to spark a legend. When Sarah Blackwood's in-laws abandon her and her 3 children in a desolate cabin, they think they're leaving them to a quiet death. They couldn't be more wrong. Thunder Horse isn't your typical Cheyenne warrior. Known as the ghost that walks between worlds, he's become a myth among both natives and settlers, the warrior who appears like winter lightning and vanishes just as swiftly. This isn't just another frontier tale. This is about how one of the most feared warriors in the territories would defy his own people's laws and challenge the settlers' prejudices to protect a family that by all rights should have been his enemies. What follows is the story of how a single act of mercy would ignite a rebellion that would change the American West forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Blackwood name had once meant something in Laramie. Even now, Sarah could see the grand ranch house on the hill, its windows glowing with warmth, while she huddled with her children in the hunting cabin, clutching Thomas's wooden cross necklace, the last gift he'd given her before that fatal hunting accident 6 months ago. She remembered the day she first arrived at Blackwood Ranch, young and full of dreams, her wedding dress carefully packed in her trunk. Thomas had stood tall and proud beside her, his eyes bright with promise, as he introduced her to his family. "They'll love you," he'd whispered, squeezing her hand. How could they not? How indeed? Sarah traced her fingers over the rough-hewn walls of the cabin, remembering the subtle shifts that had led to this moment. It began with whispers after Thomas's death, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, sidelong glances from her father-in-law Jeremiah, and the gradual coldness that crept into her mother-in-law Eleanor's voice. 8-year-old William, her eldest, stirred in his sleep beside the dying fire. Beside him, 6-year-old Mary clutched her rag doll, while 4-year-old James whimpered softly against Sarah's chest. The land deed that had sparked this nightmare lay crumpled in her pocket, the document Thomas had signed just days before his death, leaving his share of Blackwood Ranch to Sarah rather than his brothers. He wasn't thinking clearly, Eleanor had said that morning, her voice as bitter as the wind that howled outside. This is no place for a woman to make decisions about land and cattle. Then Jeremiah had driven them here in the wagon, claiming it was just until spring, just until they could sort things out properly. But Sarah had seen the truth in his eyes as he'd driven away, leaving them with barely enough supplies to last a week. The cattle drive money was due soon. Thousands of dollars that would flow into Blackwood coffers, money that, by rights, Sarah and her children should share. She understood now why Thomas had insisted on changing his will, why he'd seemed so anxious in those final days. Had he suspected? Had he known the darkness that lurked in his family's hearts? She watched the snow swirl outside the single window, remembering Thomas's stories about the cabin. It had been built as a waypoint for hunting parties, stocked with basic supplies and firewood. But no one used it anymore. Not since the rumors of Cheyenne war parties in these hills began. The tribes were restless this winter, pushed to desperate measures by broken treaties and dwindling buffalo herds. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and Sarah added another precious log to the flames. They had enough wood for perhaps 3 more days, enough food for 5 if she was careful. After that, she touched Thomas's cross again, fighting back tears. She was 26 years old, alone in hostile territory with 3 children to protect, betrayed by the family she'd trusted, and winter was just beginning to bare its teeth. In the distance a wolf howled, or perhaps it was something else. The natives called these hills sacred ground, and even Thomas had admitted that strange things happened here. Stories of spirit warriors and ancient magic that even the most hardened settlers spoke of in whispers. Sarah had always dismissed such tales as frontier superstition, but now, as the wind moaned through the eaves and shadows danced on the walls, she found herself wondering, They said a Cheyenne warrior roamed these parts, a figure so mysterious that even his own people spoke. His name with reverence. Thunderhorse, they called him, though some claimed he had another name, one given to him by the spirits themselves. Sarah pulled her children closer, listening to the night. She was a God-fearing woman, raised on scripture and practical wisdom. But as sleep finally took her, her dreams were filled with thunder and hoofbeats, and the image of a warrior's silhouette against the storm-dark sky. Tomorrow, she would have to be strong. Tomorrow, she would have to find a way to survive. But tonight, she allowed herself this moment of weakness, this space to grieve for all that was lost and fear all that was to come. The cross pressed against her palm, its familiar edges grounding her in memories of happier days, even as the winter wind sang its lonely song outside their door. Dawn brought no comfort to the hunting cabin. Sarah woke to find the fire had died during the night, and her breath frosted in the air before her. Little James coughed in his sleep, a wet, rattling sound that made her heart clench. She needed to get the fire going again, but their wood supply was dwindling faster than she'd hoped. Carefully extracting herself from the children's embrace, she pulled her shawl tighter and reached for the battered journal she'd started keeping. The pages were already filling with careful notes, inventory lists, possible food sources, crude maps of the surrounding area drawn from memory. In the margins, she'd begun marking the days with small crosses, though she tried not to look at. How many she'd already drawn. "Mama?" William's voice still heavy with sleep. "I'm hungry," Sarah forced a smile. "Just a moment, darling. Let me get the fire going first." She didn't mention that their breakfast would be nothing but a thin gruel, made from their dwindling supply of cornmeal. The boy was old enough to understand their situation, but she saw how he tried to be brave for his younger siblings. Outside, the snow had drifted halfway up the cabin's single window. Sarah had tried to clear a path to the outhouse yesterday, but new snow had already filled it in. The wind had changed direction during the night, now coming from the north, bringing with it the promise of even colder temperatures. Mary stirred next, her face pinched with cold. "The doll you made me is helping keep me warm," she whispered, clutching the crude toy Sarah had fashioned from scraps of fabric and straw. Sarah's throat tightened. The girl had left her favorite china doll behind at the ranch house. And this poor substitute was all she had now. James's cough worsened as the morning wore on. Sarah heated water and added the last of their honey to it, trying to soothe his throat. She'd been marking his symptoms in the journal, watching with growing fear as the cough deepened. "Without medicine, William," she called softly, "I need you to help me gather wood today. We'll stay close to the cabin, but we need more if we're going to keep warm." The boy nodded solemnly, already reaching for his too-thin coat. Sarah hated sending him out in this weather, but she couldn't leave the younger ones alone, and they desperately needed the fuel. They worked in the bitter cold for an hour, gathering what they could find under the snow. Most of the easily accessible deadwood near the cabin had already been collected, forcing them to venture a little further each time. Sarah kept her eyes on the tree line, watching for wolves. They'd heard them howling closer last night. It was William who spotted the tracks first. "Mama, look!" He pointed to a series of impressions in the snow, partially filled in by the recent fall, but still visible. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The tracks were large, made by unshod horses, not the kind the settlers used. "Inside," she said quickly, gathering their meager bundle of wood. "Now, William." Back in the cabin, she added her observations to the journal with trembling hands. Native riders, at least 3 horses, passing within 100 yards of the cabin. Sometime during the night. They hadn't approached directly, but they knew the cabin was here. They had to. Mary helped her organize their food supplies that afternoon, a task that only highlighted their desperate situation. The flour was running low, the salt pork nearly gone. Sarah had been giving most of her portions to the children, but she couldn't keep that up forever. Already her dress hung loose where it had once fit snugly. As evening approached, James's fever spiked. Sarah tore strips from her petticoat to make cool compresses, wiping his hot forehead while helplessness gnawed at her gut. In her journal, she wrote, "Dear God, if you're testing me, give me strength. If you're punishing me, let it fall on me alone. These children are innocent." The wind picked up again as darkness fell, and with it came a strange sound, like the low, rhythmic beating of a drum. But it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the very mountains were keeping time to some ancient song. "The ghost warrior," William whispered, eyes wide, like in Pa's stories. Sarah wanted to dismiss it as imagination, but she'd heard the stories too. Thunderhorse was said to appear in times of great need, moving like a spirit through the winter storms. Some said he was blessed by both the Christian God and the native spirits, able to walk between worlds. Others claimed he was a spirit himself, taking human form to right great wrongs. Stories, she told herself firmly. Just stories told around fires on cold nights. She had to focus on practical matters, keeping her children warm, fed, and alive until what? Until spring? Until rescue? Until the Blackwoods had a change of heart? Looking down at her journal, she realized she'd drawn a rough sketch in the margin, a warrior's silhouette against storm clouds, exactly as she'd seen in her dreams. Embarrassed by such fanciful thoughts, she started to scratch it out, but stopped. Something about the image gave her comfort, foolish as that might be. James whimpered in his fevered sleep, and Sarah sang softly to him, an old hymn her mother had taught her, about finding strength in dark times. Outside, the drum-like beating continued, keeping time with her song as if in harmony. And though the practical part of her mind insisted it was just the wind in the trees or her exhausted imagination, she could have sworn she heard hoofbeats moving through the storm, circling the cabin like a protective spirit. That night, she wrote one final entry in her journal. "The children say they feel safer now, though nothing has changed. Or perhaps something has, and I'm too afraid to admit it. Thomas always said these mountains had their own magic. I never believed him. But now I wonder, are we truly alone out here? Or are we being watched by eyes we can't see, judged by laws we don't understand?" The sound of drums continues, and with it comes not fear, but a strange hope. God help me, I think I'm starting to believe in ghosts. Thunderhorse watched the cabin from the ridge, his medicine pouch heavy against his chest. 3 days he had observed them now, this abandoned woman and her children. 3 days of witnessing their struggle against the merciless winter, their strength even as their supplies dwindled. The boy gathering wood despite his fear. The mother giving away her own portions of food, the small one's cough growing worse. With each passing sun, he touched the items in his medicine pouch: eagle feather, buffalo horn fragment, stone from the sacred caves, and something that didn't belong. A silver pocket watch, tarnished and stopped, but a reminder of another life, of promises made and broken, of a time when he too had believed in the white man's ways. The wind carried the child's coughing to him, and memories stirred like winter wolves. His own son had made such sounds in that terrible winter 15 years ago. The agency doctor had promised medicine, promised help, promises as empty as the reservations they offered his people. "You watch them long, brother?" White deer materialized beside him, silent as falling snow. The council grows restless. "They say you forget our ways." Thunderhorse didn't turn. "The ways of our fathers taught mercy, not to those who steal our lands." White deer spat into the snow. "These settlers bring more behind them, like ants to sugar. She is not like the others." Thunderhorse's hand strayed to the pocket watch again. "The strong ones cast her out, left her to die, as they left us to die." White deer's voice held bitter memory. "When the soldiers burned our winter camp, when they poisoned the water holes," Thunderhorse remembered. How could he not? The scars on his back from that day had healed, but the ones in his spirit remained raw. He had been different then, younger, a believer in peace between the peoples, until they killed his wife, his son, his hope. The medicine pouch seemed to grow warmer, each sacred item speaking its own truth. The eagle feather whispered of vision beyond the storm. The buffalo horn spoke of strength protecting the weak. The cave stone murmured of paths between worlds, of ancient wisdom that transcended the conflicts of men. Below, the woman emerged from the cabin, checking her primitive snares. Empty, Thunderhorse knew. She had set them wrong, with settlers' ignorance of the winter ways. The boy followed, trying to be brave, but Thunderhorse could see his shivers even from this distance. "There are riders coming," White Deer said after a long silence. "Bad men. They ask questions in the trading posts, show silver coins." Thunderhorse nodded. He had seen their tracks, the Blackwood brand on their horses, the hate in their eyes. Men who would kill to keep their secrets. "The council says to let them come," White Deer continued. "Let them solve our problem for us. The woman dies, the children die, the settlers blame each other. We lose nothing." But the medicine pouch grew hot against Thunderhorse's chest, and in his mind he saw again the face of his dying son. Heard again the empty promises of help that never came. Remembered the darkness that had taken him afterward when he had become the ghost that settlers feared, striking from shadows, vanishing like smoke, until the old medicine man had found him, half dead in the sacred caves, had given him the pouch, taught him its power, shown him that there were other ways to fight. "Of the paths between darkness and light, she has strength," he said finally, "the kind that grows, like spring grass through snow." White Deer sighed. "You walk a dangerous path, brother. These settlers, they do not see strength in women. Do not value the old ways. They will turn on you, as they always have." The boy below stumbled in the deep snow. His mother helped him up, and Thunderhorse saw how she used her own body to shield him from the wind. In that gesture lived everything the settlers claimed to believe, but failed to practice. Everything his own people held sacred about protecting. The weak, about family bonds stronger than blood. The medicine pouch thrummed with power, and Thunderhorse knew his path was chosen. Had been chosen perhaps from the moment he first saw smoke from their chimney. Some wars were fought with arrows and bullets, others with small acts of defiance against the falling night. "If the council asks," he said, "tell them I walk the spirit road. Tell them the sacred caves have shown me visions." White Deer touched the scar on his own face, a reminder of battles past. "And have they?" Thunderhorse lifted his medicine pouch, felt the weight of all it contained. The old ways and the new, the paths between worlds, the choices that defined a warrior's heart. "They show me a story that must be told," he said. "A story of mercy in merciless times, of strength in those deemed weak, of hope in the storm's heart." Below, the woman and boy returned to the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of blood and gold. Soon the temperature would plummet. Soon the night hunters would prowl. "Watch my back, brother," Thunderhorse said softly. "The path ahead is dark, but I must walk it." White Deer was silent for a long moment. Then he touched his own medicine pouch, smaller than Thunderhorse's, but no less sacred. "May the spirits guide you," he said finally, "and may they forgive us both." Thunderhorse watched his friend disappear into the gathering dusk. Then he turned back to study the cabin, already planning his next move. The child's cough was worsening, the wood supply nearly gone, and somewhere out there, evil men were riding, carrying silver coins and dark intentions. But he had walked darker paths than this, had found his way back from deeper shadows. His medicine pouch held the wisdom of ages, and his heart held the memory of promises broken and kept. Let them come then. Let them learn why the settlers called him Ghost. Let them discover what happened when ancient spirits and modern justice joined hands in the winter storm. The fever took James shortly before midnight. Sarah watched helplessly as her youngest thrashed beneath the thin blankets, his skin burning, despite the cabin's bitter cold. Their water supply had frozen solid, and the last of the firewood was nearly gone. "William," she whispered, touching her eldest's shoulder, "I need you to watch Mary, keep her warm. I have to find something for your brother's fever." "But Ma, the storm, I know." She kissed his forehead, trying to hide her fear. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it unless you hear me call." Outside, the wind cut through her dress like knives. Sarah stumbled through knee-deep snow, remembering Thomas's lessons about wintergreen bark, about willow branches that could bring down fevers. But in the darkness, every tree looked the same, and the snow was quickly erasing her tracks back to the cabin. A wolf howled, closer than she'd ever heard before. Sarah turned too quickly, lost her footing, and fell. The cold bit into her hands. As she tried to rise, her sodden skirts weighing her down. Another howl and another, forming a chorus that made her blood run cold. That's when she saw him. He emerged from the storm like a spirit, mounted on a paint horse that seemed to float above the snow. His face was partially hidden by a fur-lined hood, but she could see the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes, the way he assessed her situation in seconds. The wolves howled again, and this time Sarah saw their shapes moving through the trees. The warrior, for she knew immediately that this must be Thunderhorse, raised his hand. The howling stopped. "Your child is sick," he said, his English clear but accented. "The small one." Sarah struggled to her feet, fear warring with desperate hope. "James, he's burning with fever. I needed medicine, but—" She gestured helplessly at the darkness around them. Thunderhorse dismounted in one fluid motion. From a beaded pouch at his waist, he withdrew something wrapped in leather. "I have watched. 3 days. The cough grows worse." "You've been watching us?" The realization should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. "The drums we heard, medicine songs." He held out the leather package. "For fever, for cough." "But you must trust." Sarah looked at the mysterious bundle, then at the wolves that now sat quietly at the edge of the trees, like obedient dogs awaiting their master's command. Everything she'd been taught warned against trusting Indians, especially alone in the dark. But everything she'd experienced in the past week had taught her that trust, like treachery, knew no color. "Why?" she asked, taking the package. "Why? Help us?" Thunderhorse's eyes seemed to look through her, into her. "Some are thrown away, some throw away others. The spirits watch, they judge." He touched the medicine pouch at his chest. "I was thrown away once, found new path, new purpose." A particularly fierce gust of wind nearly knocked Sarah over. Without hesitation, Thunderhorse steadied her with a strong hand. The contact lasted only a moment, but she felt the warmth of him even through his gloved hand and her sleeve. "Come," he said. "The boy needs medicine. The wolves will guard our path." They walked back to the cabin together, the wolves flanking them like an honor guard. Sarah noticed that Thunderhorse's steps left no prints in the snow, though his horse's hooves did. At the cabin door, she heard William's frightened voice. "Ma, is that you?" "Yes, darling. Open up. I've brought help." The door opened, and warmth, what little remained, spilled out. William's eyes went wide at the sight of Thunderhorse, but he didn't cry out. Mary, huddled by the dying fire, clutched, her rag doll tighter. Thunderhorse surveyed the cabin's interior with quick, practiced eyes. Without a word, he went to James, laying a gentle hand on the boy's forehead. From his medicine pouch he produced more items, dried herbs, a small clay, but what looked like strips of birch bark. "Water," he said, "even frozen." Sarah brought their frozen water bucket. Thunderhorse added snow to it, then positioned it near what remained of the fire. From his coat he produced several pieces of dry wood. He must have been carrying them, she realized, anticipating their need. As the water slowly melted, he began to sing softly, the same rhythmic melody they'd heard on the wind these past nights. James's breathing seemed to ease slightly just at the sound. Or perhaps that was Sarah's imagination. The warrior worked with quiet efficiency, brewing a tea from his herbs, adding bits of bark and something that smelled sweet and unfamiliar. All the while he sang, the sound seeming to fill the cabin with a peace Sarah hadn't felt since Thomas died. He pulled something else from his pouch, a small bracelet made of beads and leather strips. This he tied gently around James's tiny wrist. "Protection," he said, meeting Sarah's questioning gaze. "From spirits that bring sickness, from shadows that walk in dark." Sarah watched as he helped James drink the medicine, supporting the boys, head with a gentleness that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. How many times had she heard stories of savage warriors? Yet here was a man treating her sick child with the same care she would have herself. When James finally fell into a peaceful sleep, his breathing easier than it had been in days, Thunderhorse stood. "I will bring more wood before dawn, more medicine." He looked at William, who stood straighter under his gaze. "You are brave, boy, a warrior's heart." He turned to go, but Sarah caught his arm. "Wait, please, tell me your name, your real name." For a long moment he was silent. Then, "I'm called Thunderhorse now. The other name belongs to another life, another world." He touched the beaded bracelet on James's wrist. "The spirits have led me here. That is enough." After he left, Sarah sat beside James, touching the bracelet gently. Such a small thing. Yet she could feel the power in it, not just in the beads and leather, but in the act of kindness it represented. Outside, she heard the wolves howling again, but now the sound brought comfort rather than fear. William came to sit beside her. "Ma, is he really the ghost warrior from Pa's stories?" Sarah smiled, smoothing her son's hair. "Perhaps he's something better, darling. Perhaps he's proof that even in our darkest hours, God sends help in unexpected forms." She watched James sleep peacefully, the bracelet glinting in the firelight. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, hope had taken root like the first stubborn flower of spring pushing through winter snow. Dawn brought more than just light, too. The cabin. Thunderhorse returned as promised, carrying bundles of dry wood and fresh meat, rabbit and grouse, Sarah noted with surprise. In the pale morning sun, she could see him clearly for the first time. His face bore the marks of hard years, but his eyes held a depth of wisdom that made her wonder about the life he'd lived before becoming the ghost warrior. "The boy is strong enough to learn," he said, nodding toward William, who watched him with undisguised fascination. "The winter is long. He must know the old ways." From a wrapped bundle, Thunderhorse produced a small bow, clearly made for a child's hands. The wood was smooth, the string perfectly tensioned. William's eyes went wide as Thunderhorse held it out to him. "But first," the warrior said, "you must learn to see, to listen. The bow is last lesson, not first." Over the next hours, Thunderhorse taught William how to read the snow for animal signs, how to spot the subtle differences between branches that would burn and those too green to be useful. Sarah watched as her son absorbed every word, every gesture. The boy, who had been struggling under the weight of forced manhood, began to stand straighter, move with more confidence. "You too," Thunderhorse said to Sarah, making her start. "The mother must be strong for cubs to survive." He showed her how to set snares properly, explaining through demonstration rather than many words. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, making the complex knots look simple. Sarah found herself learning not just the technique, but the patience behind it. "The settler's way," he said, adjusting her grip on the snare wire, "is to force, to fight nature. The old way is to understand, to work with what the spirits provide." Mary watched from the cabin doorway, clutching her rag doll. Thunderhorse noticed her interest and paused in his instruction. From his ever-present medicine pouch, he produced a small handful of bright beads. "For the doll," he said, holding them out to her. A warrior princess needs proper decoration. The girl's face lit up, the first real smile Sarah had seen since their abandonment. She watched as Thunderhorse showed Mary how to thread the beads onto thin strips of leather, speaking softly about the meanings of different colors. Red for strength, blue for wisdom, white for the spirit path. Inside, James was recovering quickly. The fever had broken during the night, and though he still coughed, it was no longer the deep, wet sound that had terrified Sarah. The beaded bracelet remained on his wrist, and sometimes Sarah caught him touching it while he slept, as if drawing comfort from its presence. "Why do you help us?" she asked Thunderhorse as they worked together to store the meat he'd brought. "Surely your people don't approve." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands moving steadily as he showed her how to cut the meat into strips for drying. "The old ones teach that all things are connected. The hawk and the mouse, the wolf and the deer, the settler and the Cheyenne." He glanced at her. "When we forget this, we forget ourselves. But your own people, they must object to you helping. Settlers, some do." He touched his medicine pouch. "But the spirits show me a path. In helping you, perhaps I help them too. Show that another way is possible." They worked in companionable silence after that, Thunderhorse demonstrating how to preserve what they had, how to make each resource last. Sarah found herself appreciating not just the knowledge he shared, but the quiet strength he brought to each task. As the day drew to a close, Thunderhorse began fashioning arrows for William's bow. The boy watched intently as the warrior explained each step, the selection of straight shafts, the careful splitting of feathers, the importance of balance. "Tomorrow," Thunderhorse said, "you begin to learn the bow. But tonight," he reached into his pouch and withdrew a small knife, its handle wrapped in decorated leather. "Tonight you learn about responsibility. A warrior's tools are his life. Care for them, they care for you." William took the knife with trembling hands, holding it as if it were made of gold. Sarah opened her mouth to object. He was too young, surely, but stopped herself. In this new world they found themselves in, age had to be measured in capability, not years. "I will return at dawn," Thunderhorse said as he prepared to leave. "The storm comes again tonight, but now you know how to face it." Sarah touched the newly set snares, the properly stacked wood, the drying meat. More than just survival skills, she realized. He had given them back their dignity, their ability to face whatever came with knowledge instead of fear. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Thunderhorse paused at the door, silhouetted against the setting sun. "The strong help the weak until they are strong. Then they help others. This is the way." After he left, Sarah watched her children. William practicing his knife care with intense concentration, Mary decorating her doll with bright beads, James sleeping peacefully with his bracelet. Something was changing in them, in her, something beyond mere survival. Outside, the wind began to rise, but now they knew how to read its voice, how to prepare for its fury. Thunderhorse had taught them more than just skills. He had taught them to see the world differently, to find strength in understanding rather than fear. Sarah touched Thomas's cross, then the new snare wire on her belt. 2 worlds, 2 ways of knowing. Perhaps, she thought, that was what Thunderhorse had been trying to tell them all along. The tribal council fire burned low as Thunderhorse faced the circle of elders. Grey Wolf, the oldest among them, held the sacred pipe in his gnarled hands, its ornate carvings reflecting the firelight. The medicine man had not yet spoken, but his eyes held both wisdom and warning. "You bring danger to our people," Black Eagle said, his voice heavy with accusation. "The settlers already push at our borders. Now you give them reason to come deeper, into our hunting grounds. The woman and her cubs harm no one," Thunderhorse replied, standing firm. The medicine pouch at his chest seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "They were cast out, left to die. As we were cast out, Running River spat into the fire. How many of our children died in the snow when the army drove us from our winter camps? How many mothers wept while settlers watched from warm homes? The council pipe passed from hand to hand, each elder taking a ceremonial draw before speaking. When it reached White Deer, Thunder Horse's old friend hesitated before drawing. "My brother walks a dangerous path," White Deer said carefully. "But perhaps the spirits have shown him something we cannot see. The old stories speak of times when barriers must be broken for new wisdom to emerge." "Stories!" Black Eagle's voice cracked like a whip. "While you tell stories, more settlers come. They bring their guns, their diseases, their God who has no room for our ways." He pointed at Thunder Horse. "Already he teaches them our sacred hunting grounds, our medicine ways." Grey Wolf raised his hand, and silence fell immediately. The old medicine man took a long draw from the pipe, then spoke in a voice like wind through ancient caves. "I have consulted the spirits," he said. "They show me troubled waters, paths that cross and uncross. They show me a warrior who walks between worlds, carrying old medicine to new places." His eyes fixed on Thunder Horse, "But they also show me blood. Change comes with a price." From beneath his robe, Grey Wolf produced something that made the council members stir uneasily. A soldier's brass button, tarnished and stained with old blood. "You wear their watch," Grey Wolf said to Thunder Horse. "You carry their metal in your medicine pouch. The spirits ask, 'Who are you, ghost warrior? What path do you truly walk?'" Thunder Horse touched his medicine pouch, feeling the weight of the pocket watch within. "I walk the path the spirits show me. The woman has strength, wisdom. Her children learn our ways with respect, not greed." "And when more come," Black Eagle demanded, "when they learn that we harbor their cast-offs, the Blackwood family has many allies among the settlers. They will not let this woman keep their gold." A murmur ran through the council at the mention of gold. Thunder Horse had not known of this, but it explained much about the Blackwoods' actions. "The spirits don't speak of gold," Grey Wolf said sharply. "They speak of choices, of bridges built or burned." He held up the bloody button again. "The past bleeds into the future. The question is, what future do we choose?" The pipe completed its circle, returning to Grey Wolf's hands. The old medicine man studied it for a long moment, then spoke again. "Thunder Horse walks with powerful medicine. The spirits gave him his name, showed him his path, but the council must protect the people." He looked around the circle. 7 days. You have 7 days to resolve this matter, Ghost Warrior. After that, the council must act." Thunder Horse bowed his head in acknowledgement, though his heart was troubled. 7 days was not long to change minds hardened by generations of betrayal and loss. As the council dispersed, White Deer approached him. "The Blackwood riders come closer," he said quietly. "They ask questions in the trading posts, show silver coins for information. And there are others, men with hard eyes and cavalry. Rifles." Thunder Horse nodded. He had expected this, but the news still sat heavy in his chest. "Watch the trails," he said. "The woman and her cubs must have warning if they come." White Deer touched the scar on his face, a reminder of past battles. "The council has spoken. 7 days, brother. What will you do?" Thunder Horse looked up at the stars, remembering the teachings of the old ones. The medicine pouch seemed to whisper against his chest, each sacred item adding its voice to the chorus of choices and consequences. "What I must," he said finally. "What the spirits have shown me, the path is dark, but it must be walked." His friend gripped his arm briefly, a warrior's farewell. They both knew that the next 7 days would change everything, for better or worse. The only question was who would still be standing when the storm passed. Jeremiah Blackwood unfolded the worn map on the trading post's rough-hewn table, his fingers tracing the hastily sketched landmarks. Around him, his sons Marcus and John crowded closer, their breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "Thomas marked it here," Jeremiah said, tapping a spot near the sacred hills. "The gold deposit, enough to make the cattle business look like penny wages." His face darkened. "Then the fool had to go and change his will. Leave it all to that woman." "She can't survive up there," Marcus growled. "Not in this weather. Problem will solve itself." The smoke still rises, John countered. Someone's helping them. Traders whisper about the ghost warrior, the one they call Thunderhorse. Jeremiah spat on the floor. Indian superstition, but someone's keeping them alive. We can't wait for nature to do our work. He rolled the map tight, tucking it into his coat. Time to finish this. Miles away, Sarah stood at the cabin window, watching William practice with his bow. The boy's aim was improving daily, his arrows finding their mark more often than not. Thunderhorse's teachings were bearing fruit. "Ma!" Mary called from where she was sorting herbs. "Look what I found in the medicine bag." She held up a piece of paper that had fallen from the supplies Thunderhorse had brought that morning. Sarah's heart stopped when she saw it. A letter written in Thomas's familiar hand, dated just days before his death. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, my fears were justified. The gold deposit I discovered in the sacred hills. Father will kill to keep it secret. I've changed. My will to protect you and the children, but that may not be enough. There's a map hidden in my..." The letter ended there, torn off, but it was enough. Sarah's mind raced back to Thomas's last days, his nervous glances, the way he'd insisted on changing his will. Not just business foresight. He'd known he was marked for death. Thunderhorse materialized from the shadows so suddenly that Sarah gasped. "They come," he said without preamble. "Many riders, hard men with guns." "The Blackwoods," Sarah whispered. "They killed Thomas over gold. Now they're coming to finish what they started." Thunderhorse's eyes fell on the torn letter. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or confirmation of something long suspected. "The sacred hills hold many secrets," he said. "Some are not meant for men's hands." He touched his medicine pouch. "But first, we must get you to safety." "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her resolve. "Thomas died trying to protect us, trying to do right. I won't run from his killers. They bring many guns. Then we'll need help." She met his gaze steadily. "Your people know these hills better than anyone. The gold is in their sacred land. Shouldn't they have a say in its fate?" Thunderhorse was silent for a long moment. Then he drew something from his pouch, a piece of paper that completed the torn letter. "A map drawn in Thomas's hand. Your husband," he said quietly, "came to our elders before he died, sought permission to mine the gold in a way that respected our sacred places, offered fair payment, protection of holy ground." His eyes held Sarah's. "He died because he wished to do right by both peoples." Sarah took the map with trembling hands, seeing for the first time the full scope of what Thomas had tried to achieve. Not just a gold claim, a bridge between worlds, a chance for cooperation, instead of conflict. "The council must know of this," Thunderhorse said. "The Blackwoods' lies poison both our peoples." He looked toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered. "But we have little time." Sarah gathered her children close, feeling the weight of the moment. "Then we'll make it count," she said, "for Thomas, for all of us." Thunderhorse nodded, a warrior's respect in his eyes. The wind rose outside, carrying with it the distant sound of hoofbeats. The hunt was on, but the hunters might find themselves becoming the hunted. Sarah stirred the pot of stew simmering. Over the fire, a blend of rabbit meat and wild roots that Thunderhorse had taught her to find beneath the snow. The aroma filled the cabin with a warmth that went beyond mere heat, a reminder of how far they'd come from those first desperate days. "The old ones call this spirit soup," Thunderhorse said, watching her add the herbs he'd brought. "Food that feeds more than the body." Mary sat cross-legged nearby, grinding dried berries and nuts into pemmican the way Thunderhorse had shown her. The girl's fingers moved with practiced ease now, her fear of their strange ally long since transformed into deep trust. "Tell us again about the sacred hills," she asked, her hands never stopping their work. "About the spirits that live there." Thunderhorse's eyes crinkled slightly, the closest he came to smiling. From his medicine pouch, he withdrew a wooden spoon, intricately carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. He handed it to her, and she felt its warmth despite the cabin's chill. "My grandmother made this," he said. "She said, cooking is like life. Many ingredients coming together to make something new, something stronger." He watched as Sarah used the spoon to stir the stew. "Like your family and mine, different ingredients, same pot." William looked up from where he was fletching arrows, his hands already showing the calluses of a young hunter. "Is that why the Blackwoods are afraid? Because we're mixing things that should stay apart?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thunderhorse was quiet for a long moment, his hand straying to his medicine pouch. "Fear makes men build. Walls," he said finally, "between peoples, between hearts. Your father tried to break those walls, now you do the same." Sarah felt the weight of Thomas's letter in her pocket, his final words a testament to the bridge he'd tried to build. "He saw something worth fighting for," she said softly. "Worth dying for. Worth living for," Thunderhorse corrected. He rose and went to the window, scanning the darkness outside. The storm comes soon, big medicine in the air. James coughed softly from his bed, but it was the clean cough of healing now, not the wet rattle of fever. The beaded bracelet on his wrist caught the firelight, its colors seeming to dance. "The soup is ready," Sarah announced, using the grandmother's spoon to fill bowls. The simple act felt sacred somehow, as if she were participating in a ceremony, older than memory. They ate together, the silence comfortable rather than strained. Sarah noticed how Thunderhorse's movements matched theirs now, how her children had unconsciously adopted some of his quiet grace, worlds blending like ingredients. "In her stew, you've lost much," Thunderhorse said suddenly, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "But you are like the winter willow, bending, not breaking, growing stronger in the storm." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "We've gained much too," she said softly. "Understanding, strength, friends we never expected to find." Thunderhorse touched his medicine pouch, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of consulting deeper wisdom. "The spirits show many paths," he said. "Some lead to war, some to peace." He looked at each of them. "In turn, the path you walk changes all paths. What do your people say about that?" Sarah asked. "About helping us?" "They fear change," he admitted. "As your people do, fear the mixing of worlds." He lifted the wooden spoon, studying its carvings. "But change comes like the storm. We can fight it or learn to dance with it." Mary finished her stew and began humming softly, a Cheyenne melody Thunderhorse had taught her. The sound filled the cabin, bridging worlds in a way words never could. "My grandmother would have liked you," Thunderhorse said so quietly Sarah almost missed it. She understood that strength comes in many forms, that family is not always blood. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the promise of snow. But inside, something else was growing. Something that defied the boundaries men had drawn between peoples. Like the spirit soup they shared, it was made of many ingredients, but had become something greater than its parts. Sarah touched Thomas's. Cross, then the wooden spoon. 2 symbols, 2 worlds. But perhaps Thunderhorse was right. Perhaps the strongest path was the one that braided them together, like Mary's new way of wearing her hair, like William's bow that married settler. Craft with native wisdom. The storm was coming. The Blackwoods were coming. But in this moment, sharing food from a grandmother's spoon in a cabin that bridged worlds, Sarah felt a deeper truth emerging. Some walls needed to fall. Some ingredients needed to mix. And sometimes, the heart's wisdom transcended the fears that kept people apart. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the morning stillness. Thunderhorse materialized from the shadows, bow ready, while Sarah hustled the children to their hiding spot beneath the floorboards, a precaution he'd insisted upon days ago. But the rider who emerged from the tree line was no Blackwood. It was Daniel Cooper, the young trader who'd sometimes bought Thomas's cattle. His horse was lathered, his clothes caked with snow. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Thank God you're alive." Thunderhorse melted back into the shadows as Sarah stepped outside. "Daniel, what brings you up here?" The young man dismounted awkwardly, favoring his left leg. "The Blackwoods. They're coming, not just the family. They've hired guns, mean ones." He pulled a crumpled paper from his coat. "I wrote it all down, both in English and—" he glanced around nervously, "in Cheyenne, least as best I could manage." Sarah took the warning message, noting the careful attempt at native symbols alongside. The English words. "You know the Cheyenne language?" Daniel flushed. "My ma, she was helped by them years back, and taught me some. That's why I had to come. The things Jeremiah's saying in town, the men he's gathered, it ain't right." The warning message detailed the Blackwoods' forces, 12 hired guns, former cavalry scouts among them. They planned to burn out any natives they found, claim self-defense. The gold would be their justification, their excuse for whatever bloodshed followed. Thunderhorse emerged silently behind Daniel, making the young man start. But there was no hostility in the warrior's gaze as he studied the warning message, noting the careful attempt at his people's writing. "You take great risk," Thunderhorse said. "Why?" Daniel straightened. "Because I was there when Thomas died. It wasn't no hunting accident. He was murdered, shot in the back." His voice shook. "I was too cowardly to speak up then. I ain't staying quiet now." Sarah felt the world tilt. All these months believing it was an accident, while this young man carried the terrible truth. "The Blackwoods threatened my family," Daniel continued. "Said they'd burn us out too if I talked, but I can't let them do this. Not again." Thunderhorse touched his medicine pouch, then made a decision. From within it he drew a small token, a carved piece of antler bearing sacred symbols. This he pressed into Daniel's hand. "Courage speaks with many voices," the warrior said. "Your warning may save many lives." Sarah saw the tears in Daniel's eyes as he clutched the token. "There's something else," he said. "Something Thomas told me before they killed him. He said if anything happened to him, I should tell you about the cave, the one behind the waterfall. Said there were papers there, proof of what the Blackwoods have done." Thunderhorse's expression sharpened. "The sacred cave. He went there. Said he had permission from your elders. Said there was proof in there that could protect both peoples." Sarah remembered the torn letter, Thomas's mention of trying to do things right. Even in death, he was still revealing new layers of his plan, his dream of bridging worlds. "You must go," Thunderhorse said to Daniel. "The storm comes soon. But remember, you have friends among the people now." After the young man rode away, Sarah studied the warning message with its dual languages. Like the grandmother's spoon, like Thomas's map, it represented something larger, the possibility of understanding between peoples. "Your son married a wise man," Thunderhorse said quietly. "He saw the future that must come, if any are to survive." "And now?" Sarah asked. Thunderhorse looked toward the sacred hills, where the cave waited with its secrets. "Now we make sure his death was not wasted. The spirits have shown the path. We must be brave enough to walk it." The warning message fluttered in the wind, English and Cheyenne side by side, a small bridge across a large divide. The storm was coming, but they would face it with truth as their shield, and the strength of two peoples as their sword. Grey. Wolf's voice carried across the council fire, heavy with the weight of generations. "You bring the widow to our sacred places, to the cave of our ancestors." The old medicine man's grip tightened on his feathered staff. "Have you lost all wisdom, Thunderhorse?" The council circle was larger now, with warriors and mothers joining the elders. The gravity of the situation had drawn the whole tribe into judgment. Thunderhorse stood in the center, his medicine pouch open, its contents laid bare before them. The eagle feather, the buffalo horn, the cave stone, and, most controversially, Thomas Blackwood's proof of the gold claim. "I bring truth," Thunderhorse said, his voice steady. "The white man who died, he sought to protect our sacred lands, not destroy them. His widow carries his vision. His children learn our ways with respect." "And the hired guns that follow them?" Black Eagle demanded. "What respect do they bring?" White Deer stepped forward, the warning message in his hands. "The young trader risks his life to warn us. There are some among the settlers who stand for justice." "Justice!" Running River spat. "Their justice hung my son. Their justice starves our children on barren lands." A murmur ran through the gathering. Too many had lost too much to the settlers' expansion. Too many graves marked their path of broken promises. Sarah stood at the edge of the circle, her children close. She had insisted on coming, on facing the council herself. Now she stepped forward, though Thunderhorse had warned her not to speak unless spoken to. "My husband died," she said clearly, "because he believed our peoples could find a better way. The Blackwoods killed him for that belief." She held up Thomas's torn letter. "He came to your elders, sought permission, offered partnership instead of theft. The proof in the sacred cave could stop not just the Blackwoods, but all who would steal from these lands." Grey Wolf raised his staff for silence. His eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, studied Sarah for a long moment. "You speak with a warrior's heart," he said finally, "but this is not your battle alone." "No," Thunderhorse agreed, "it is all of ours." He gestured to William, who stood straight and proud despite the many eyes upon him. "Look at this boy. A month ago, he knew nothing of our ways. Now he hunts with respect, speaks thanks to the spirits, learns the old wisdom. His sister makes medicine with plants we showed her. The youngest wears our protection and grows strong." "Pretty words," Black Eagle scoffed. "But words do not stop bullets." "Neither does hatred," White Deer countered. "Neither does clinging to old wounds while new ones fester." The council fire crackled, sending sparks into the darkening sky. Grey Wolf closed his eyes, communing with powers only he could sense. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming deeper, older. "The spirits show me a great circle," he said, "the past flowing into the future reaching back to heal the past. They show me a warrior who walks between worlds, carrying medicine that must be shared if any are to survive." His eyes opened, fixing on Thunderhorse. "They show me children, not just these three, but many, learning to bridge the divide our fears have created." He rose, ancient joints creaking, and walked to where Sarah stood. From his robe, he drew something that made the council gasp: the sacred pipe, used only in the most solemn ceremonies. "The woman will smoke with us," he declared, "her children too, and then we will decide." The pipe ceremony lasted into the night. Sarah and her children learned the sacred words, the ritual gestures. When the pipe came to William, he handled it with such innate reverence that even Black Eagle's stern expression softened. Finally, as the moon rose over the sacred hills, Grey Wolf spoke the council's decision. "The spirits have shown us a path," he said, "a hard path, a dangerous one, but one that must be walked if our people, all people, are to have a future." He pointed his staff at Thunderhorse. "You will continue to protect them, to teach them, and when the storm comes—" He looked around the circle, his gaze commanding. "We will stand with you." The council's judgment had been rendered. As Thunderhorse gathered his medicine items back into his pouch, he felt their power renewed, strengthened by the binding of two people's fates. The storm was coming, but they would meet it together, with ancient wisdom and new allies joined as one. Daniel Cooper wasn't the only one who carried secrets about the Blackwoods. As word spread through the territory about the coming confrontation, others began to emerge from the shadows of fear the family had cast. Martha Whitaker arrived at the cabin at dusk, her wagon loaded with supplies and her face set with determination. "My Robert," she said without preamble, "he found their gold first, 3 years ago." She handed Sarah a packet of yellowed photographs. "He was so proud, planned to make us rich. Then they found him face down in the creek. Accident, they said. The photographs showed claims stakes, maps, Robert Whittaker standing proudly beside rocky outcrops. But more importantly, they showed Jeremiah Blackwood and his sons in the background of several shots, watching, planning. I kept these hidden, Martha said, her hands trembling. Knew they'd kill me too if they found them. But when I heard about Thomas, about what he tried to do, she straightened her spine. Well, enough's enough. Time someone stood up to them. Thunderhorse studied the photographs with intense focus. These marks, he pointed to scratches on a rock face. They are sacred signs, ancient warnings about the spirit path. More came as the day progressed. Jim Baker, a former ranch hand, brought ledgers showing how the Blackwoods had cheated their workers. Samuel Runningstream, a half-Cheyenne scout, arrived with tales of how Jeremiah had deliberately sabotaged peace talks to keep tensions high, making it easier to grab land while people fought. My father was at those talks, Samuel said, his face hard with memory. Believed in peace. They shot him in the back too, called it Indian trouble to get the army riled up. White Deer arrived as the sun set, bringing news from the trading posts. The Blackwoods gather more men, he reported, but their lies begin to crack. Some refuse to ride with them now, hearing these stories. Sarah spread the growing collection of evidence on the cabin table, photographs, ledgers, letters, each a piece of the dark puzzle the Blackwoods had tried to bury. Thomas knew, she said softly. He must have been gathering proof, planning to expose them. A dangerous game, Thunderhorse observed, to hunt wolves while living in their den. Martha Whittaker touched one of the photographs, her finger tracing her dead husband's smile. They've ruled through fear for too long, made us all complicit with our silence. She looked around the cabin, at the strange gathering of settlers and natives brought together by shared injustice. But fear loses its power when people stand together. Samuel Runningstream nodded grimly. Two worlds, one enemy. My father would have appreciated the irony. As night fell, more arrived. Former workers, cheated partners, native scouts who'd witnessed the Blackwoods' treachery. Each brought their piece of the truth, their testament to years of corruption and violence. The cave will wait, Thunderhorse said as he studied the growing evidence. These stories, these proofs, they are medicine too, strong medicine against lies. Sarah watched the unlikely allies sharing her cabin, sharing their stories. Settlers and natives, each wounded by the same snake, now joining hands to draw out its poison. Thomas would have been proud, she thought. His dream of bridging worlds was happening. Though not in the way he'd planned, the photographs seemed to whisper their own story, of greed, of murder, of a family that had built its fortune on others' graves. But they whispered of justice, too, of truth finally emerging from shadow, of courage found in unlikely unity. Tomorrow, Thunderhorse said as the gathering dispersed into the night, we go to the cave. But tonight, we are stronger. The Blackwoods ruled by making us stand apart. Now we stand together. Sarah gathered the evidence carefully, each piece a weapon more powerful than bullets. The storm was coming, but they were no longer alone against it. Blood ties, she realized, weren't just about family. They were about the bonds forged in standing up to evil, in choosing justice over fear, in bridging the divides that kept truth buried. The blizzard struck with a fury that even Thunderhorse called spirit anger. Winds howled down from the sacred hills, driving snow so thick it turned day to twilight, and with it came unwanted visitors. Riders, White Deer announced, materializing from the storm like a ghost. Blackwood men, but not all of them. The storm drives them here, no choice. Sarah hustled her children to the hiding space beneath the floorboards, then faced the door. Through the window, she could make out shapes emerging from the white void, men on horseback, shoulders hunched against the killing cold. Thunderhorse touched her arm. The storm is spirit sent, he said. It forces truth into the open. Decandersur, first pounding on the door, came moments later. In the name of God, let us in! A voice Sarah recognized. Marcus Blackwood, Thomas's younger brother. "We'll freeze out here." Sarah opened the door, her husband's rifle ready. Marcus stumbled in, followed by 4 other men, hired guns by their look, though the storm had humbled them considerably. "Sarah?" Marcus blinked ice from his eyelashes. "You're alive." His hand moved toward his gun, but Thunder Horse's arrow was already nocked and drawn. "Your men will drop their weapons," Sarah said calmly. "The storm gives you shelter, nothing more." The hired guns looked to Marcus, who nodded stiffly. Frozen, half dead from cold, they were in no position to argue. Their guns made a dull thunk on the wooden floor. "Father's still out there," Marcus said as he huddled near the fire. "With John and the others. Got separated in the whiteout." Thunder Horse's eyes met White Deer's. Silent messages passed between them. The storm had split the Blackwood forces, scattered them across the sacred hills. But it had also brought some of them here, within reach of truth's arrows. Sarah stirred the ever-present pot of spirit soup, its aroma filling the cabin. She felt the hired gun's hungry gaze, saw how Marcus tried not to show his own interest. "Your brother," she said as she worked, "tried to do right by everyone, create peace instead of war. That's why your father killed him." Marcus stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Sarah nodded to Thunder Horse, who withdrew. Martha Whitaker's photographs from his medicine pouch. "Robert Whitaker found the gold first, didn't he? Before Thomas, before he had his accident." Color drained from Marcus's face as he recognized the images. One of the hired guns leaned forward, suddenly more interested in the photographs than— "The soup got hired to clean up Blackwood messes," the man drawled. "Starting to wonder if we're on the wrong side of this thing." Outside, the storm reached a new pitch of fury. Thunder Horse's winter count robe, hanging near the fire, seemed to ripple with its own inner life. The warrior had been recording this. Winter's events on it in the traditional way. Pictures that told the story of death, betrayal, and the building of new bridges between peoples. "Your father's vision is the past," Thunder Horse said to Marcus. "A past built on blood and lies. Your brother saw a different future, chose a different path." He touched the winter count robe. "The spirits themselves testify. Change comes. Whether we choose it or not." Sarah served the soup even to their enemies. She remembered Thunder Horse's words about ingredients mixing to create something stronger. Even now, in this storm-forced truce, she saw the truth of it. "Thomas came to the people," Thunder Horse continued, his voice mixing with the storm's howl. "Sought permission, offered respect. The cave holds his proof, his dream of peace." He fixed Marcus with a penetrating stare. "What does your heart hold, son of Blackwood? Your father's poison, or your brother's courage?" Marcus stared into his soup bowl, years of certainty cracking like river ice in spring. The hired guns watched him, their own loyalties shifting with each revealed truth. The storm raged through the night, forcing enemies to share warmth, food, and gradually understanding. Sarah's children remained safely hidden, but she felt their presence below the floorboards. The next generation, watching and learning as old hatreds began to thaw in the face of undeniable truth. By dawn, the storm had forced more than just shelter-seeking. It had forced choices, revelations, the first cracks in walls built by fear and greed. The winter count robe recorded it all, its symbols telling a story of change coming on a spirit wind, of truth buried in snow, finally rising to light. The storm's fury had barely dimmed when Jeremiah Blackwood's voice boomed across the snow-swept clearing. "Marcus, get out here, boy. We're ending this now." Marcus tensed by the cabin window, his face a battlefield of conflicting loyalties. The photographs lay scattered before him, evidence of his family's crimes that he'd spent the night studying by firelight. "Your father brings many guns," Thunder Horse observed quietly, "but you have seen the truth. Now you must choose your path." Outside, more voices joined Jeremiah's. John Blackwood, the eldest brother, calling for blood. the remaining hired guns, their shouts carrying threats and promises of violence. Sarah checked Thomas's rifle one last time, the weapon he'd used for hunting, never dreaming it would be turned against his own family. "My children stay hidden," she said firmly, "no matter what happens." The first shot shattered the cabin's window, sending glass and snow spiraling across the room. Sarah's return fire was immediate, precise. Thomas had taught her well. A cry of pain told her she'd found her mark. "That's my good girl." Jeremiah's voice dripped mockery. "Show us that spirit. Makes it more fitting when we burn you out." Thunderhorse moved like smoke through the cabin, his arrows finding gaps between logs to strike at shadowy figures in the storm. White Deer's warriors, hidden in the surrounding trees, added their own fire to the defense. "Brother!" John Blackwood shouted. "Stop hiding behind that woman's skirts. Face us like a man." Marcus stood, his decision written in the set of his shoulders. "I've seen the truth, John. Father's lies, his murders. I won't be part of it anymore." "Weak like Thomas," Jeremiah spat. "Should have known you'd turn too." A burning arrow arced through the broken window. Sarah kicked snow over it, even as Thunderhorse loosed a return shot that sent a hired gun tumbling from his horse. More arrows, more bullets. The cabin walls shuddered under the assault, but the defenders had prepared well. White Deer's warriors picking off attackers from multiple angles, Thunderhorse's arrows striking with supernatural accuracy, Sarah's rifle barking defiance. With each pull of the trigger, below the floorboards, William clutched his small bow, ready to defend his siblings if needed. The weapon that had been a teaching tool might yet prove itself in battle. "The cave!" Jeremiah's voice rose in fury. "The gold is what matters. John, take half the men. Get to it before they can reach the proof." Thunderhorse's eyes met Sarah's. They had expected this. The split attack, the desperate grab for the evidence that could destroy the Blackwoods forever. "Go," Sarah said firmly. "We'll hold here." The warrior hesitated. "You face great danger." "We've faced it since the day they left us to die." Sarah's grip tightened on her rifle. "Go, protect Thomas's dream." Thunderhorse touched his medicine pouch, then pressed something into her hand, a small carved figure from within it. "Ancient protection," he said softly. "The spirits watch over you." He moved to leave, but Marcus stepped forward. "I'm coming. With you. Time to do right by my brother." A moment of evaluation passed between the two men. Then Thunderhorse nodded. Together, they slipped out the cabin's back door into the swirling snow. The battle intensified. Sarah heard White Deer calling orders in Cheyenne, coordinating his warriors' defense. More burning arrows came, but the snow-covered roof refused to catch. The cabin had weathered winters and storms. It would weather this human tempest too. A bullet splintered the doorframe near Sarah's head. She returned fire, hearing Jeremiah's curse as her shot found range. Strange, she thought, how easily Thomas's hunting rifle had adapted to this new purpose, like the cabin itself transformed from shelter to fortress, like her children learning to bridge worlds, like everything in this storm-swept confrontation, changed by circumstance into something stronger. William's voice drifted up through the floorboards, singing one of Thunderhorse's medicine songs. The sound steadied her aim, reminded her what they fought for. Not just survival now, but a future where such songs could be sung freely, where bridge builders like Thomas would not die for daring to dream of peace. The carved figure in her pocket seemed to pulse with power as she reloaded. The spirits were watching indeed, and they would not let justice die in the snow. Thunderhorse led Marcus through the storm-swept forest, their path illuminated by flashes of lightning that seemed to dance between earth and sky. Behind them, gunfire at the cabin grew fainter, though every shot made Marcus flinch. "Your father chooses his ground poorly," Thunderhorse said as they reached higher ground. "The spirits walk these hills. They do not suffer evil gladly." As if in answer, thunder rolled across the sacred hills. Through gaps in the storm clouds, they could see John Blackwood's group struggling up the slope toward the waterfall cave, their horses fighting the deep snow. There! Marcus pointed to movement in the trees. They've got scouts flanking the main group. Thunderhorse touched his medicine pouch. And we have warriors in place to meet them. The first clash came suddenly. White Deer's warriors emerged from the snow like spirits, their arrows finding the scouts before they could shout warning. Thunderhorse's bow sang, dropping another. Of John's men from his horse. "Brother," John's voice carried on the wind, "I see you there, trading your blood for Indian magic." "Trading lies for truth," Marcus shouted back. His own shot caught one of the hired guns in the shoulder, sending the man tumbling into a snowdrift. The battle spread across the hillside. Thunderhorse's warriors moved like shadows through the storm, striking and vanishing, drawing John's men away from the cave's entrance. But John himself drove forward, possessed by the same greed that had stained his family's hands with blood. Thunderhorse and Marcus reached the cave mouth first. Inside, ancient paintings flickered in the stormlight, spirit animals, sacred. Symbols and newer marks, surveyor's notes, claim stamps, Thomas's careful documentation of his dream of cooperation. "So much death for this," Marcus said, touching one of the cave walls. "All that gold under our feet, and Thomas just wanted to make peace." "Gold blinds," Thunderhorse replied. "Spirits see clearer." John's voice echoed from outside. "Burn them out! Smoke the cave!" The attack came from multiple directions. Burning branches hurled toward the cave mouth, bullets sparking off rock faces, men charging through the snow. But Thunderhorse had prepared for this too. Hidden warriors rose from drifts, their arrows, precise and deadly. Others appeared on the ridgeline above, rolling boulders down to block the easier approaches. And through it all, Thunderhorse's bow never stopped singing, each arrow finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. Marcus proved himself too, his shots keeping the hired guns pinned, while White Deer's warriors worked their way behind them. The battle turned into a dance of shadows and snow, of quick violence and strategic retreat, but John Blackwood had not come this far to be denied. He charged through the defensive fire, bleeding from 2 arrow wounds, but driven by desperate rage. "The gold is ours!" he screamed. "Our birthright!" Thunderhorse met him at the cave mouth, bow cast aside, knife gleaming. The 2 men clashed in a brutal contest of strength and skill. John's fury met Thunderhorse's fluid grace, hatred against wisdom, greed against honor. Marcus watched the fight, his own gun ready but unable to find a clear shot as the men grappled. Through the storm's fury, more warriors arrived, Grey Wolf himself among them, his medicine staff raised high. The old medicine man's voice rose above the wind. The spirits passed judgment. As if commanded, lightning split the sky. The blast illuminated the cave mouth in stark relief, showing John's knife pressed toward Thunderhorse's throat, the warrior's own blade turned aside. But in that frozen moment of light, everything changed. Thunderhorse's free hand pressed his medicine pouch against John's chest. Power, spirit medicine gathered over years of walking between worlds, flowed through the sacred items within. John's eyes went wide as he felt something no bullet could stop, no gold could buy. The second lightning flash showed John Blackwood falling, not from any wound but from the weight of truth itself. His legs buckled, his knife dropped, and the cave mouth seemed to shimmer with ancient power. "The spirits judge," Thunderhorse said softly. "The path you walked ends here." As John collapsed, the remaining hired guns fled into the storm. White Deer's warriors let them go. There had been enough blood spilled on sacred ground. Marcus looked at his unconscious brother, then at the cave paintings that had witnessed it all. "What happens now?" Thunderhorse retrieved his bow, checking it for damage. "Now we return to the cabin. Your father's judgment awaits." He touched the medicine pouch again. "The spirits are not finished speaking." The storm began to ease as they secured John and gathered Thomas's evidence from the cave. The sacred hills had seen justice done, but the day's work was not complete. There remained one more Blackwood to face, one final accounting to be made. Thunderhorse led them down the hill, his medicine pouch glowing faintly with power. The spirits had shown their hand, but mortal justice too must be satisfied. At the cabin, Sarah and her children waited. The circle of retribution and redemption needed closing. The morning sun broke through dissipating storm clouds to find the cabin surrounded by territorial marshals. Word had spread fast after Daniel Cooper's ride to the nearest fort, carrying tales of murder and corruption that could no longer be ignored. Marshal James Hawkins studied the official documents spread across Sarah's table, territory papers that would prove vital in the coming proceedings. Property deeds, mining claims, Thomas's careful records, and statements from those the Blackwoods had wronged over the years. "Ma'am," he said, looking up at Sarah, "this is quite a case you've built. Murder, fraud, intimidation. Goes back years from the looks of it." Jeremiah Blackwood sat in chains nearby, his face a mask of impotent rage. The fight had gone out of him after John's capture, after seeing his carefully built empire of lies crumble in a single storm-swept night. "The territory's been wanting to crack down on claim jumping and frontier justice," Hawkins continued. "Make an example. Looks like we've got our case." Thunderhorse stood in the corner, watching the proceedings with quiet intensity. The territorial marshals had been surprisingly respectful of his presence, perhaps because several of them had heard the stories of the ghost warrior who walked between worlds. "There's more," Sarah said, producing Thomas's final letters from the cave. "My husband was working with the Cheyenne Council, had agreements in place for fair payment, protection of sacred sites. The gold could have benefited everyone." Hawkins nodded grimly. "Instead of profiting a few at the expense of many, tale as old as the territory itself." He turned to Thunderhorse. "Your people's testimony will be crucial. The territory's starting to recognize tribal rights, slowly but surely." "The spirits have spoken," Thunderhorse replied. "Now men must listen." Grey Wolf entered the cabin, his presence commanding immediate attention. The old medicine man carried something that made even the marshals straighten, a peace pipe. Ancient and powerful, its surface carved with symbols of justice and truth. "This pipe," Grey Wolf said, his voice carrying the weight of generations, "was smoked when the first treaties were made, before men forgot how to keep their words." He placed it carefully on the table beside the territory documents. "Now it watches as new words are written, new promises made." Marshal Hawkins seemed to understand the significance of the moment. "The territory will honor the agreements Thomas Blackwood made with your council. The sacred sites will be protected. The gold worked in partnership." He looked at Jeremiah. "Unlike some, we aim to keep our word." Marcus stepped forward, still wearing the blood and grime of battle. "I'll testify. About everything. Time someone in this family stood for right instead of profit." Sarah watched as the marshals began organizing the evidence, preparing for the long legal proceedings ahead. Strange, she thought, how formal justice seemed almost anticlimactic after the spirit-touched battle in the sacred hills. But perhaps that too was part of bridging worlds, finding ways for ancient wisdom and modern law to work together. Thunderhorse moved to her side. "The circle closes," he said softly. "Your husband's vision takes root in new soil." William approached them, carrying his small bow with new confidence. "Will you still teach us?" he asked Thunderhorse. "Even after the trial's done?" The warrior's eyes crinkled slightly. "The teaching has only begun. Two peoples have much to learn from each other." Marshal Hawkins finished gathering the documents, securing them in his saddlebags. "Mrs. Blackwood, we'll need you and your children to testify in Cheyenne next week. Your friend too, if he's willing." He nodded respectfully to Thunderhorse. Time for the territory to hear the whole truth. As the marshals led Jeremiah and John away, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thomas's death had been avenged, yes, but more importantly, his dream lived on. The evidence would ensure justice through white man's law, while the peace pipe reminded all of older, deeper commitments. "What happens now?" Mary asked, clutching her beaded doll. Sarah looked at Thunderhorse, then at Grey Wolf. seeing in their eyes the same vision Thomas had died believing in. "Now," she said, "we build something new, something stronger than gold." The morning sun caught the peace pipes' carvings, making them seem to dance within a light. Outside, White Deer's warriors mingled with territorial marshals, two kinds, of justice finding common ground. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake not just destruction, but the seeds of transformation. Spring came early to the sacred hills that year. As the snow retreated, revealing the first tender shoots of green, Sarah stood outside the cabin, watching William practice with Thunderhorse. The boy's arrows flew true now, each shot accompanied by the proper prayers of thanks that the warrior had taught him. "He has strong medicine in his heart," Thunderhorse said, adjusting William's stance slightly. Like his father before him, much had changed since the trial. The Blackwoods were serving their sentences in the territorial prison, their empire of fear dismantled. The gold claim was being worked now through a partnership between settlers and the Cheyenne, with profits shared and sacred sites carefully preserved. Mary sat nearby, grinding herbs with Grey Wolf's granddaughter, the two girls chattering in, a mix of English and Cheyenne. The old medicine man had taken a special interest in Mary's gift for healing plants, teaching her the ancient ways while she shared settler remedies in return. A ceremonial blanket lay spread between them, its intricate design telling the story of the past winter, the battle, the storm, the joining of peoples. Grey Wolf had presented it to Sarah's family during the ceremony that made them honorary members of the tribe, a bridge between worlds. "The council meets today," Thunderhorse said, his eyes on the distant hills. "They discuss making this arrangement permanent, a new kind of settlement where both peoples live and work together." Sarah touched Thomas's cross, which now hung beside a medicine pouch of her own. "It's what he wanted, what he died believing in." Thunderhorse's hand covered hers briefly. These moments of contact had grown more frequent lately, each one carrying meaning deeper than words. The children had noticed, of course. Last night James had asked innocently if Thunderhorse would be their new father. "The spirits walk new paths," the warrior said softly. "Show us ways we did not see before." Sarah watched as a group of settlers approached from the valley. Martha Whitaker, Daniel Cooper, others who had stood with them against the Blackwoods. They brought supplies, news, and most importantly, a willingness to learn and change. White Deer emerged from the trees to greet them, his initial suspicion replaced by cautious friendship. The photographs that had helped convict the Blackwoods now hung in the trading post as a reminder, alongside newer images of cooperation and shared prosperity. "Thunderhorse," she said carefully, "the children ask about you, about us." He was silent for a long moment, watching William demonstrate a hunting technique to a settler boy. "Among my people," he said finally, "a warrior must prove himself worthy of a family, must show he can protect, provide, teach. And have you?" Sarah asked, her heart quickening. His eyes met hers, deep with meaning. "The spirits have shown me my path, if you would walk it with me." Before she could respond, James came running up, his beaded bracelet glinting in the spring sun. "Ma, Thunderhorse, Grey Wolf says it's time for the ceremony." The whole community was gathering near the sacred hills, settlers and Cheyenne alike. Grey Wolf stood waiting with the peace pipe that had watched through so much change. Today, it would witness something new, the formal adoption of Sarah's family into the tribe, and perhaps the beginning of an even deeper joining of worlds. The ceremonial blanket would record it all, the prayers, the promises, the way Thunderhorse's hand found Sarah's as they faced their gathered peoples. A new story was being woven, as complex and beautiful as the blanket's own patterns. "Your husband's dream grows stronger roots than he knew," Thunderhorse said as they walked together toward their future. "Some trees grow best in soil mixed by storm." Around them, the sacred hills seemed to glow with approval. The old ways and the new were finding balance, like ingredients in spirit soup, like harmony in a medicine song. And in that balance lay the promise of tomorrow. 1 year later, the photographer captured a moment that would symbolize everything they had fought for. The family portrait showed Sarah and Thunderhorse standing proudly together, their children arranged before them. William with his bow, Mary wearing her medicine pouch, James holding the beaded bracelet that had first bridged their worlds. Behind them, the sacred hills rose majestically, while settlers and Cheyenne alike gathered in the background, a living testament to Thomas's dream of unity. The gold from the hills now funded schools where children of both peoples learned together, hospitals that combined modern medicine with ancient healing ways, and trading posts where cultures met in peace. But the real treasure, Sarah knew, lay in the changes within hearts and minds. Thunderhorse, once the ghost warrior, now led hunting parties that included settler boys eager to learn the old ways. His medicine pouch still carried power, but now it was the power of building rather than fighting, of growing rather than surviving. Thomas's cross hung in their new home alongside sacred tribal items, telling its own story of bridges built and worlds joined. His dream lived on, stronger perhaps than if he had lived to see it himself. The spirits, Thunderhorse often said, choose their own paths to justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.